Welcome to Scanner School. This is Phil Lichtenberger. My trader call sign is W2LE, and this is session number 86. All session notes can be found on our website at scannerschool.com/session86. Before we get started on today's podcast, I want to remind you that this session is sponsored by East Coast Pagers. Now, yes, East Coast Pagers is one of my online companies, and we are a Unication, Apollo, and Swiss Phone pager dealer. There's a couple of promos running on Unication products, and I want to tell you one right now. You can save half off. You can save 50%. You can get half of it for free. I don't know how you want to talk about it, but whatever it is, if you have a older G4 or G5 pager, trade in your aging battery now. So Unication wants you to trade in your old and tired lithium-ion battery for a brand new one. And they feel like not enough people are updating their batteries, and they should be. So right now, Unication is offering 50% off a brand new lithium-ion battery for your G2, G3, G4, or G5 pager. The trick is you must trade in the battery, which means I need your old battery back if you buy a new battery from me. So the batteries are $29.95 plus shipping. When you send back your old battery, I'll cut you a rebate check for $14.98. So for your math geniuses at home, yeah, I gave you that extra little cent to make it an even trade on your part. So you go to eastcoastpagers.com, purchase the 2800 milliampere battery for the Unication G Series pagers. When you get your new battery, you put your old battery back in the box, you ship it back to me, and I cut you a check for half the price of the battery. Again, the batteries must be returned to me within 7 business days, and this is how you get a brand new battery for your Unication G Series pager for under $15. Again, eastcoastpagers.com. That's eastcoastpagers.com.
Welcome to The Scanner School, a podcast dedicated to the scanner radio hobby. Class is about to begin. Here is your host, Phil Lichtenberger.
So welcome back to Scanner School. If this is your first time here, do me a favor, let's hit the subscribe button, and this way the next week's episode will be sent automatically to your podcast player of choice. If you're a returning listener, I want to say welcome back. It's great to have you here. And this is a great episode for you to be listening to. This is an interview with Pete Vasto. Now, Pete has been blind since birth, and he is a scanner user. Now, this is also a continuation of a question that came up last week in our Ask Scanner School segment. Now, Ask Scanner School is a once-a-month segment that we run where we answer your questions. And again, if you have any questions for me that you'd like to have answered, you can go to scannerschool.com/ask. And that is exactly what Tom Schill did. He asked about any text-to-speech programs that he could use, or any software he can use from his text-to-speech software. That's the right way to phrase that statement there. And he is totally blind as well. So I basically teased this week's podcast because I had already recorded the interview with Pete. So I kind of had this one up my sleeve. But there's a couple of things I want to point out here before we really get started into the podcast. This is a great interview. I really enjoyed this interview with Pete, and we cover a lot of things. Now, we don't cover completely everything. This is really from Pete's perspective. This is, how Pete gets around his disability, right? He's programming his scanners a certain way. He's using software. He's using text-to-speech. He's definitely hitting some obstacles, and we are talking about his personal obstacles when it comes to using his scanners on this podcast. Now, somebody else might have some different obstacles or may have other solutions, and if you'd like to chime in, again, we have comments are more than welcome at scannerschool.com/session86. Also on our Facebook group as well. Also, something to point out is when we recorded this podcast, FreeScan was not yet in open source. It is now just recently added to an open source platform, which basically means there'll be a bunch of people contributing to the code for FreeScan. So when we did record this, that wasn't the case, but it is now. So please don't be jumping up and down saying, hey, FreeScan is now open source. Yes, it is now open source, but when Pete and I did this interview, it wasn't yet released that it was going to be or was open source. Hope that makes sense. So now, anyway, This is probably my most lengthiest interview we've done, but it's a very fast interview. At least that's what I think. I really enjoyed this interview with Pete. Hopefully you do too. Again, this is something that I have been wondering about for a while, is how somebody who is limited in sight or somebody who is completely blind can use today's modern scanners, because they are menu driven for most of the part. And it does require computer software to set up, or is best left to set up with computer software. So Pete and I discussed this process. We go through it. Pete has a lot of tricks up his sleeve that he can use to help himself out. And again, and one of the more interesting things to realize and to keep in the back of your mind as you're listening to Pete talk, he programs his scanners by himself. He doesn't have anybody helping him out. He won't ask his wife for help. So it's very interesting to know that even though he's totally blind, he's able to enjoy the hobby just like you and I. So again, this is a rather long interview. It runs over an hour. So I'll see you now on the other side of this interview with Pete Vasto. Okay, so today we have Pete Vasto on the podcast. I'm hoping I got his name right again. But
You did.
I did. Excellent. Thanks, Pete. So Pete contacted me directly using the contact form on Scanner School, and this is actually Pete's idea for a podcast. So I'm very lucky, and I think we all too, that Pete came forward and wanted to share his story, because Pete's got a very interesting story when it comes to scanning. So Pete, thank you very much for being our guest today.
It's really great to be here. Honestly, I've been looking forward to it.
Okay, so to let the cat out of the bag a little bit, let's just, you are totally 100% blind, is that correct?
There are a number of ways that people want to say it. I'm from the old school. I'll just put it bluntly. I'm totally blind. I've been that way since I was born. So I don't have any, visual memories or anything like that. But I am retired. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, ironically, in New York. And I attended the public school system. I was first and only blind student in the schools. And it was quite an interesting set of challenges. But that's a whole other story, which we won't get into now.
Okay, not a problem. So, yeah, we'll keep it related as much as we can to scanners and scanner radio. So how did you get into the scanning hobby?
Well, I lived in New York growing up. And we happened to be right underneath the flight path for JFK Airport. So we had jets flying over all the time, and I used to love to listen to them. And initially, I used to like to tape record the sounds of them. But then in 1968, one of the radio stations did a show because air traffic at JFK was getting congested. And they did a story where a pilot let a reporter fly in the cockpit of a plane from Burlington, Vermont to JFK. And part of the broadcast had conversations between pilot and air controller. And I'm thinking, geez, this is fascinating. I want to get into it. So in 1968, they weren't scanners, but I was able to get a portable radio with a dial for tuning. And I was able to monitor the conversations between pilot and air controller. And that's what kind of got me started. I can't remember exactly when I got my first scanner. I moved out to California in the early 70s, and I went through a couple of more analog radios, but then I started reading about crystal control scanners, and I thought, geez, I don't know if I want to get involved with that, because you got to worry about rewinding crystals or doing this, and if somebody changes a frequency, you got to get a new crystal. And I said, no, I'm not going to worry about that. But then I learned about the Bearcat 2020, which was it had 40 channels and a little switch. So you had two groups of 20 channels, and I could flip the switch. So I had aircraft communications on one bank and police calls on the other. So that's kind of what got me started into it.
Okay, so that's interesting, because I figured that crystals would have been an easier path for you to go down, but to backtrack a little bit too, nothing has changed with JFK. I mean, because I'm about 45 minutes away from JFK, and I mean the flights do go overhead my house, but nothing like what they go over in certain areas of Nassau and Queens. So they just keep rerouting them, and things do keep changing. But there's nights where, or more days and evenings where it's just like, where did these planes come from all of a sudden?
Hmm.
You know, they're coming in all the time. So nothing there has ever changed. So if you come back to Long Island or New York City, you'll feel right at home like you never left.
Well,
So,
I'll tell you what, I have the Live ATC app, and I have a confession to make. I love to tune in on JFK all the time, so I'm very familiar.
excellent.
Crazy
So I'm
airport.
just looking up the unit in 2020 right now. 'Cause it's not really a radio that I'm familiar with, though. I think I have the link wrong. So it was
You
a
so
Bearcat 2020. That's why I can't find it. So so that one had basically, it was, what was it, a dial and then a couple of switches, or how did that one exactly
no,
work?
it actually had a keypad.
Okay.
It's your basic number keys and an enter key. And so you would punch in a number and hit enter, and boom, the frequency would be there. It had a knob for squelch, and it had a volume knob. And I believe it even had, like a lot of the older scanners did, you could turn the squelch switch off, and it would have like kind of an auto setting to get it as close to the drop off point as it could do. So,
Gotcha.
so you basically had the two groups of channels. Then in the mid 80s, and I can't remember the model of this one. I want to say XL100, but it was a 16 channel handheld.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to program that. It didn't have any key beep confirmation tones, but I could still enter the frequencies I wanted. I could scan with it, and the coolest part was I could, take it to work with me, or if I went to airports, I could, tune in the frequencies and listen to what was going on. So that was, that was the first handheld that I got. I lasted with that actually for quite a while. I think it was probably not till the early 90s. Then I got a Radio Shack Pro 43.
Okay.
Which I don't remember how many channels. I think it was either 100 or 200. And I could still work with it because you had, manual scan, whole, manual and those keys, but there was not much else. You could just key in frequencies and go from there. Of course, when any frequency would come up, I could never see what was on the display, but it was okay because I could tell based on the traffic what frequency I was listening to.
Exactly. Okay. Yep.
Go ahead.
And I was gonna just say too that that 2020, going back to it, because I don't like to, leave anybody hanging. I just looked at that one, and it's very familiar to me. I think my dad had the later version of that one. So you had the little toggle switch, the AB switch on it, you were just saying.
Exactly.
The later ones didn't have that toggle switch. So I actually have one of those similar radios that it's sitting in my garage right now, and I haven't really been able to use it because it doesn't have the T-band, which is exactly where I need it to be for some of the stuff I want to listen to. So it is definitely a dated radio. But I like what you said too about some of the other radios where it gave you the audio feedback, so you knew what you were what you were inputting and everything else like that as well. So I'll let you continue what you were going to say.
Yeah, so it just like I said, I could enter like 120.5 and it would beep for every key, so I'd know.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gave like a double or triple beep to say, "Oops, you made a mistake. Try again." So that was really nice. When in the early 2000s, I guess that's when I was beginning to realize that I needed to get trunk systems. I had a job that involved a 2-hour commute on a rapid transit system that used EDAX. And of course, the Pro 43 didn't know what EDAX was. So I had to look for a radio that I could use. And the one that I settled on was the Radio Shack Pro 96. It was not menu driven. I could at least enter frequencies in. Programming a trunk system was a little bit more difficult because you had to know all the parameters and had to manually enter them. But I also learned about a program called Win96 written by a guy, I think his name was Don Starr.
Don Starr, yep.
Yeah. And he actually, I got the program on my computer, and surprisingly, it actually worked with the special software that I have to use. And I can explain that a little bit more maybe later in the broadcast.
Yes, I've definitely flagged that to go back over. So we'll talk about that in a second.
So, but the idea was that I could use the program to, in fact, you could even download it from Radio Reference. And he had just enough in there so that I could use it. In fact, I contacted him and he worked with me to make a couple of additional modifications to the program so that, like, he had boxes for delay, lockout, and priority. He was able to fix it so I could get a low beep for when it was not marked and a high beep for when it was marked, so that I could,
neat.
delay and priority and all that. So it really, I mean, I love the radio. It certainly satisfied my needs for quite a while. Then I had an accident in 2011 where I made the mistake of having an external antenna connected to it, and lightning got a little close and the scanner fried. So I've learned my lesson about external antennas, I'll tell you. But anyway, I wound up getting a GRE PSR 500. And this was my first exposure to menu-driven scanners. Now, the PSR 500, of course, also was able to pick up some of the digital trunking systems, but it had what were called soft keys and menus and everything. And I knew almost immediately that I was going to be in trouble. But I did find software called PSR Edit 500, which, while not completely usable, was usable enough so that I could at least get it going and, and do what I wanted. I eventually wound up about a year later going back to eBay, and I found some Pro 96s used in good condition that I, went back to working with just because it was a lot easier for me to work with it. I could do searches while I was on the road. If I wanted to enter a new frequency on the road, I could do it. I could never do that with the 500, but the 500 did serve needs for me, at least when I was at home and when I was in the local area where I already had stuff programmed. I guess, maybe last year, I moved to Portland, Oregon in early 2017. And last year, the public safety group went to P25 phase 2. And of course, the Pro 96 stopped working.
Yeah.
So I knew I had to do something. And now I knew I was really going to, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I had a friend who had, I think it was a 396, one of the guys I worked with, and he showed it to me, and it really scared me because, that was just as menu driven as you could get. You couldn't do anything without using the menus.
Yeah.
I figured, how the hell am I going to do this? I decided Amazon had the 325 for a good price, and we are Prime members, and Amazon had a very good policy about returning. So I thought, you know what? Take the plunge, see what you can do. So I bought it. And before I bought it, I discovered FreeScan. And I realized that FreeScan looked like it was accessible and sounded like it would work with the 325. So with a lot of painstaking research after I got the scanner, I was actually able to get the scanner programmed, got my frequencies downloaded and imported stuff from Radio Reference and was able to use it. But there's an awful lot of limitation because I really cannot do a whole heck of a lot while I'm out and about. If I've missed a step somewhere and can't get a frequency in or whatever, it's very, very difficult to do. So it's a bit frustrating, but at least I have something to monitor the public safety, which is what I wanted to do. And now also some of the airlines here are now using DMR. Mm-hmm. And so I got the DMR upgrade. And so I was able to get that installed. And one thing I'll tell you, that FreeScan has one nice feature that it does have is a virtual scanner control where you can basically bring up what comes up on the scanner screen on your computer screen. And my screen reader does pick it up. So I can actually go through the menus while I'm connected to the computer. So that's how I was able to program the DMR systems in, because FreeScan doesn't support that. So
that's good.
Yeah. So I was at least able to do that. But again, it's really, very, very limited. There's a lot of information that the scanner is giving me that I cannot and will not ever see. I've also got, and this is the end of the story here, I bought, because my primary area of interest is aircraft. And so I bought a BC 125.
Okay.
It's very easy to program. Uniden has software which actually works very well with my computer. So I could program everything. And the menus, while they're there, it's a little bit easier because there's not much on them, and I can memorize what's in each menu, and I get a beep every time I change position. So sort of been able to get by with that radio. And so, like, if I'm going out for walks and whatnot, and I don't need to hear the public safety stuff, I'll take the 325 with me, and it served me very well.
Right. In fact, I'm happy to hear that you settled on the 125 and the 325, because as you're explaining everything and the menu driven, and I think that menu driven scanner you were talking about was probably the new Home Patrol, the BCD 436, possibly.
Maybe.
It's a long radio, but that's like 100% software driven with soft keys on the front, and that one would probably be a little bit difficult for you to use. But again, like you said, the 125, the menu system on it is very short. It's very easy. I use my 125 really to do NYPD and FDNY, just because I don't need the trunking with them, and it's just easy, and it's a small memory channel system. And even that 325, you're right about that one too. That's the one I would have gravitated towards if you didn't have one picked out already, because it's the least confusing radio to use out of all the ones that do P25 phase 2 at this point, the way I feel. Everything is pretty much at this point menu driven, from Whistler to the Unidens, and they're just getting more and more screen intense, basically, to say. And I'm pretty happy to hear, though, that you were able to use FreeScan with your screen reader. I was wondering too, I mean, I know you gravitated toward FreeScan. Don't know if I know you said also via emails that you tested out Butel and ProScan, and they weren't compatible with your screen reader either. But have you tried either one of those with the virtual display to see if your screen reader worked with those as well, or was it just FreeScan?
Oh, it's only been FreeScan, because I gave up on both ProScan and Butel because there was just it was even difficult to get to menus to get to where where you wanted to go. I mean, it just
gotcha.
And then the other problem too is they give you trials. The trial runs out, and then you're stuck. And what really is a bit frustrating to me, and I don't want to sound like a bitter or complaining or anything, but the frustrating part to me was, particularly with Butel, I actually wrote to them and I asked them, is there anything that you might be able to do with the software, because I am a blind listener, I love scanning, but I can't use the software. Would you consider doing anything to make the software a little more usable with my screen reader? And they flat out said no.
Wow.
And so, and I had, it's just, I have not contacted ProScan yet. I just haven't, felt to do it, because I'm getting by with, what I have to do. But I mean, most blind people, the one thing about me is, without trying to toot a horn too loudly, I come from a 40+ year career in the technology industry. So I have a pretty good feel for the kinds of things that are going on, and I've learned, lots of ways to get around things. But, a lot of the blind community does not know how to do that through no fault of their own. It's just the way it is. And so, it's very challenging. I don't know how many other blind have actually tried to, tried to use these scanners. Like me, they may have been afraid to. It took me a very long time. The 325 has been around since like 2015. But I have to say, I've got to put in a plug here. There's just no comparison to the reception on the Uniden scanners than what the Pro 96 was. I'm kind of sorry I didn't do Uniden beforehand, because there was a lot of stuff in the Bay Area I wasn't able to get, which if I'd had the Uniden, I would have. Okay, end of plug.
No problem. I was actually surprised, though, that you were saying that your 96 lasted as long as it did, and it took a lightning strike to get rid of it, as opposed to just kind of falling apart on its own. So they get pretty beat up pretty quickly.
What you don't know is the ones I got after it fell apart pretty quickly.
Yeah, I have a 2096, which is the desktop version of that scanner. and the screen on it went bad on it, and I sent it back for repair, and of course, after 2 or 3 weeks, the screen goes out on again. I say, I forget
Yeah.
it. It's so now that radio just kind of sits in a corner, kind of thing. But I don't think that product line was really good. I think the 97 was much better. The Pro 97 and the Pro 95 was great, but whatever it was, that middle line, I think they just weren't on there. They must have been drinking that night when they made that one. So
Either that, thinking they were going to go under, which they wound up doing. So who knows?
Yeah. That's
Anyway.
a whole other thing. But so the software you're using, it's a screen reading software. How does that come with Windows, or is that something aftermarket that you had to purchase?
It's with Windows. It's aftermarket. And if I may,
Okay.
let me give a Reader's Digest version.
Yes, please.
Of what it's like for me to use a computer without seeing the screen. And the basic way to think about it is unplug your monitor and take your mouse away. When you don't have a monitor, you can't see what's on the screen. When you don't have the mouse, you can't click on things. Most of the software that's written it's very graphical intensive. They want you to have the mouse, they want you to have the monitor. When you don't have those things, it's not easy to do. So that's the short version of what happens. On Windows, there are several different screen reading programs that are available. 2 or 3 of them you have to pay quite a bit of money for, up to $1,000 a piece for them.
Wow.
There is one program that is free that's up and coming. There's a couple of fine fellows in Australia that developed it. I actually met them a couple of years ago at a conference. They're really, really wonderful guys, and they've done quite a bit with it. And a lot of the blind community is embracing that program, but it's just not as robust as the paid-for screen readers. Very briefly on Mac and on iPhones and whatnot, Apple has actually built in screen reading right into their program. In fact, I was honored to have been able to work with them for a few months as a contractor as they were just starting to get it off the ground. They had me give them input on how the PC screen readers worked, and so they got some ideas for how to do things. And the only reason I didn't stay there was because they wanted someone full-time who knew how to program in their language, which I did not know how to do. But so Apple has it all built in. We're using Skype on my iPhone, and when you called, the phone spoke your name, and it was a very simple matter of just answering the call very quickly. So, so that's basically what happens as far as the screen readers go. Now, to make the screen readers work with software, basically 2 things need to happen. One, when you are trying to, let's say you're programming a frequency, there are obviously a number of parameters that you fill in. You do the frequency, you do the modulation, you do the CTCSS if there is one. Mm-hmm. And the way you would have to do it if you didn't have a mouse is you have to use the keyboard. So you press the tab key, and it takes you start out in the frequency field, you type frequency, hit tab, then you're in the modulation field, let's say. Hit tab again, then you're in the lockout field. Then you hit tab again, you're in priority. But in addition to being able to do that, you have to get feedback from the computer to say, okay, you are on the frequency field, enter the frequency. You are on the modulation field, it's a drop down. So you select AM, FM, or whatever. So FreeScan does this to a certain extent. It's not very reliable. It's a little bit tricky because they've not really clearly labeled all of the buttons. So it took a lot of hunting and pecking to realize, for example, how to set a quick key or a startup key, because it wasn't telling me I was on the startup key. I had to kind of go up and down the list and figure out based on the choices I had, what thing I was on. So, so those are basically the kinds of things that have to happen. And unfortunately, Butyl and ProScan, I don't have that capability. I just can't see, I can't see menus. I can't, even when I'm getting in to try to fill in information, I just can't work with it. So,
gotcha. So now that's kind of, I guess that would be written into the code, like where the dialog box would come up. It would have like the on screen thing, but it would also have to have coded in there the audio of that. Is that
Yeah,
how
it
that
would
works?
there is a way, and there are so many different program languages. I'm not a programmer, but what I do know is that there are ways you can create what are called labels. In other words, each field has a label, like frequency, like modulation. And there is a way that you can code it so that instead of just appearing visually on the screen, the screen reader itself can pick up the information. And I'm not technical enough to know how it works, but that's basically the kind of thing that would have to happen. So,
Gotcha.
So that's pretty much, this is how I pretty much, will go through things. When I'm in FreeScan, when I go in to a group and add channels, it does announce as I go through each channel. So it'll say channel name, I think it calls it display. Then it says frequency. Then it says modulation. So I do get a really good feel for what's going on. The other thing that someone did with that program is they developed what's called blind-friendly mode. It sounds kind of weird, but basically what they have done is when you have that mode, there are some additional things you can do with the keyboard. Like if you want to add a system, you do Control-Shift-S. When you want to insert a channel, you do Control-Shift-I. So they've tried to, a little bit at least, to make it so that I, as a blind person, can work with the program, which is nice.
Gotcha. It sounds like when you use a screen reader program, it's a lot like using before Windows, right? You had DOS and everything was just
exactly
tab, and so when you were talking about that, it's like it just reminds me of a program of some older DOS only radios, and even still, even as a visual user, I still find myself using the keyboard shortcuts a lot more than I end up using a mouse, because I did develop carpal tunnel. So for me to use the mouse sometimes can be very painful, especially for repetition type of work. So I also find myself gravitating towards keyboard shortcuts, using tabs and stuff like that. So okay. I understand when you say you can only enter things using the keyboard. To me, I'm right at home with that. So
okay, and I will tell you that I have actually had other people tell me, just like you, there should be more than that. The other nice thing about being able to use the keyboard is you don't have to take your hands off the keyboard to go to the mouse, move it around, find what you want, and go back to typing again.
Correct.
And the biggest issue seems to be, because I worked for a leading software company in the Bay Area on accessibility to try to make their products usable for the blind. And the biggest problem has always been, when you're talking about writing the software, is they do not consider this kind of thing as a priority. They want to make things look pretty visually. And so they'd rather concentrate on that. And if you don't build it into the program at the beginning, it's a little harder to add.
Right. So they're looking at, unfortunately, looking at like where they market the largest audience, and they start backtracking through it. Yeah, I can understand that. Yep. So, but
that's, that's, if FreeScan ever goes open source, maybe there will be someone, and I had heard that there was talk about that. I know the developer doesn't appear to be doing anything more with the program now, but I had heard a few months back anyway that they were considering making it an open source program, which basically, for those who don't know, it means that anyone can take the program and add some code to it and make it available to the general public. And, what would be really cool is if there would be some developer out there who would take on the challenge of saying, how can we clean this up to make it, to make it work better.
Yep, that would definitely be good, because I definitely heard that same rumor that development on FreeScan has stopped. That's why at this point, too, there's been no work on DMR systems being added to it, even though DMR has been able to be programmed in radios for quite some time. And I've also heard, too, that he was talking about the possibility of making open source, and that would be great, too. I mean, just for, for what you need it for, maybe somebody else can come in there and they can clean it up and they can update it and whatnot. But again, too, it sounds like Butel has, I know they're patching the software, so they are making bug fixes and bug releases, but it sounds like what you're saying is if they didn't put the text-to-speech in from the get-go, it's kind of difficult to add it back into it. So I'm wondering if that's what – I'm just speculating what a stumbling block is. But, again, going back to ProScan, I know Bob is very, very active in coming out with new releases to ProScan, and I think he just released version 15.2, if not mistaken. So he is actively coming out with large upgrade steps on the software, as well as minor software. So he's constantly adding the new software versions on. I mean the hardware. So now ProScan supports the STS 100, STS 200, and then he added the ability to use DMR and XDN on those radios. Then he added the European versions of them. So he is constantly stepping up. Now again, those might just be turning off and on type of handshakes. Like if you expect this, then do that. So if you already coded in the 436 and the 536 to code in the STS 100, 200, it might just be as simple as changing a couple things on the GUI, and then the handshake protocol, like when it says this is what the radio is, and accept it. But I can't speak for him, other than the one or two times I've actually had an email back and forth with him. He's very, very receptive. But again, ProScan is it's got a lot of tabs. It's got a lot of information on the screen. It's got a lot of places where even I, as a visual user, get lost in there, because it does do a lot of stuff. It's not just for programming. It's programming, logging, recording, streaming, and a whole bunch of other stuff that you probably would never even touch on that software if you're just sticking to the programming side. But that might be, unless there's another free version of something out there or open source type of thing. And unfortunately, it sounds like your best bet would probably have something on a Mac, because it does have a lot of good text to speech on it already built into it. That just there's nothing really out there for the Mac.
Sadly, there's no software to program a scanner on.
I know. That's it seems like it's just every way that could be a roadblock for you. It seems like there's something in your way.
I really do hate to sound complaining, but this is unfortunately the way it has been for me. I'm just very blessed that I've been able to at least get this far with it, so I can enjoy some of the hobby.
Right. Now let's talk about how you've gotten this far with it. So obviously, when you do the programming, you're listening to. I mean, you kind of have the keyboard mapped, and you know what buttons you're pressing based on the way they feel and their placement. I mean, the number pad, basically the 1 through 9 and 0 basically never changes, right? That's kind of universal. It's just really learning where the lockout keys are, priority keys, the power button keys, and then that kind of stuff. And just with time, I guess you would just remember where all those keys were.
That's exactly.
But how is it like, take us through the process? You got a radio, and now you have to learn how to use it. I mean, how do you get accustomed to the radio, and how do you learn how to use it? I mean, obviously the manuals or print manuals, unless you can read the PDF and grab the PDF online and read it text to speech, how are you navigating a radio and learning how to operate it?
Okay, you said the magic words by being able to download and read the PDF versions of the manual, because fortunately those manuals, Adobe has done a lot to make reading PDF manuals accessible. And so I can pull down, I've got all the manuals for all of my scanners pulled down. And so that's how I start reading it. With the 325, no, I didn't really have to get that much sighted help, because the keys were not, like you said, it's just a matter of that left-hand row, which has scan, search, hold, lockout, and menu. Those are the ones I really needed, to learn where they are. So basically what I can do, FreeScan allows me to import stuff from Radio Reference, and then actually I kind of have to take the stuff outside of FreeScan. I can go to like a group, like let's say I'll download all the frequencies from the Portland airport, which I'm at, and the Radio Reference import comes down with about 12 or 13 frequencies, because it's got everything, tower, ground, approach, and all that stuff. But if I don't want to do that, one thing that FreeScan does allow me to do is it allows me to take the whole group, copy everything using copy and paste, put it into Notepad, which is the computer program to, just write text files and whatnot. And so then I can manipulate rows, and put them in the order that I want, and then import them back into FreeScan. So that, like for Portland, I've got one for the tower frequencies, one for ground and clearance delivery, one for approach. So I can, I can segregate the stuff the way I want to. And then what you can also do with the 325 is you can assign number tags, so that if I know I want to listen to the Portland Tower, I can just, code in the number tag, in other words, system number dot number tag, and I can, bring up the tower. The only one time I get into a lot of trouble with the 325 is, and this is a very well-known bug, I think, if you're scanning and you inadvertently take out the last group within a system you're scanning, the scanner says nothing to scan, and you can't pull it back unless you go through the menu system to bring back you have to reselect the system and re-enter the group. It's a complicated process. I don't want to necessarily go into it here, but I've gotten myself into trouble a couple of times, but I've learned how to get out of it. But basically, I have to very carefully study the manual. And what I did was I just programmed a very few conventional frequencies. I did a couple of groups, a couple of systems, just so that I could understand how to move between systems and then between groups within the system, if I wanted to do that. Then I moved on to trunk systems. And once I realized that I could use FreeScan to do virtual scanner control, that was a tremendous help, because I could at least see what I was landing on, and whether, especially when you're on the trunk systems, you really need to know, what talk ID you're on, so you know what you're listening to.
Right. Yeah, definitely. That was another question I had for you too. I mean, you talked about it earlier, like you knew what you were listening to based on who was transmitting. So I mean, obviously, when you're listening to aviation, what
Right.
you're listening to. But I guess listening to PD, by PD based on the types of calls and the unit numbers you're listening to and all that stuff as well.
Not all the time, but that's what you're supposed to be able to do.
Right. So that's what I was going to ask you about. So I mean, it's not that easy then?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
If I don't have the scanner, I can make a best guess. Not if I don't have the scanner. If I don't have the computer, I have to make a best guess as to what I'm listening to. But I do have number tags assigned, so if I want fire dispatch, I can punch in that number tag and just be listening to it. But sometimes, you've got the fire call, and then they go to a TAC channel, and sometimes they're between 3 and 4 channels, and it's a little bit harder to, to scan back and forth.
And you have everything mapped in there with a system, and an ID tag. Everything in there is
everything
is
that
set
I
up,
want
or
to do. Yeah, I've
okay,
assigned number tags to them.
gotcha. But not everything though.
Well, I don't have everything. If I'm
Okay.
not, if I don't care and I just want to go through something just to listen to what's happening, no. But if I've got systems that I want to pay particular attention to, I've got number tags on everything.
Okay, and how do you organize it as well too? Because I know with a lot of stuff too, you have the system key, and then you have the group key. Then obviously you have the ID key.
Right.
How do you normally group them together so you know what you have enabled and disabled on the scanner?
Well, the system level. See, I forget how many system. Oh yeah, you can have 100 system quick keys.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is like I've got system number 1 is the local airport. System number 2 is public safety. System number 3 is the Port of Portland, which I can monitor some of their operations at the airport. Number 4 is railroads. So what I do is I have a major category for each one, and then within each system, I will say, like within the Portland Airport, let's say, group number 1 is tower. Group number 2 is delivery and ground. Group number 3 is approach departure. Group number 4 is airline. So you have, you're a little limited because you only have like 10
groups. Yep.
Groups, but it's enough. I mean, for what I've needed to do, and if I have to consolidate, I'll do it. One thing I've just started getting, I don't travel very much right now, but I've done a little. And one of the things that I found is really neat on the 325 is the startup key concept, if you know what you're doing, where
Right.
you can take, I just went to Los Angeles a little while ago. So I brought in all the Los Angeles airport stuff and gave them a different startup key. Like my main startup key is number 1, and that's what comes up all the time. But then when I got to LA, I would hit startup key number 2. And so all I needed to worry about was the LA airport stuff, which was, it was kind of cool to be able to isolate that. The only thing I had to remember was that my system quickies were like 11, 12, 13, not
Right.
1, 2, 3, and 4. But it worked very well until I pressed the wrong key and hosed the scanner. But fortunately, I had the 3D 125 with me, so I was able to still get enough out of it. But I'm sure a lot of people have had problems with the 325 where you do things and it takes a little while to get out of it. In fact, I have a friend in the Bay Area who got a 325 after he found out I got one, and we've been back and forth. We've been helping each other out with stuff because of situations we've gotten into.
You know what's nice too about those radios too is if you ever do get yourself into a spot where you get stuck, you can just rewrite to it with the computer and just start off from a known configuration where, you know, you can kind of reset yourself and get yourself grounded again. So it sounds like though you've got yourself, you got these radios figured out better than most people do. To be honest with you, I know a lot of people who like myself, for a lot of the menu-driven scanners, I don't even bother using system keys because I just use the menu system. Because to me, to memorize where everything is and to put into punch keys, I can cycle through the systems and turn things off and on. But for the radios that do have systems, a lot of times I don't program in the groups with keys on them at least, because I always found out that it was a lot of people were turning those off and on by mistake because where you rest that function button where your thumb is on the side of that. A lot of people didn't realize they were pressing the function button. They were turning the groups off and not turning the systems. So that got to be a bit of a struggle for a lot of people as well. So
smiling here because I've done that too many times. Absolutely.
All right. So then I guess I want to say preaching to the choir, but yeah, go ahead.
I have one thing I would like to say, and this is kind of a thing. If I could have the world on a silver platter and get everything I wanted, the one thing I wish could happen, and I don't know how easy it would be to do with these things, but if there were a way that these scanners could have a chip inside where you could, with a certain keystroke, you could turn it on so that as you're going through the menu, it would announce the menus as you're going through it. It would announce each item as it's selected. I know that they're doing it in so many other devices. What I don't know is what are the hardware limitations inside the scanner? Would there be, room to do something like that? The other thing, failing that, would be if I could get a list, like for the 325, more for the 325 than the 125, but for either one of them, I would love to get a list of, like, when I'm going to use the 125 as an example because it's a little easier. There's like 4 different priority settings. You do function 1 and it puts you into a menu. So you have either priority off, priority do not disturb, and then there's like a couple other options.
Right.
If I could
priority
get a
only.
list of, if I could get a list of, in other words, if you press and go into this menu, here are the choices. Because what the scanners do, and both the 325 and the 125 do this, they give you a double beep when you're at the top of the menu. So you're on the first choice. And then as you turn the knob, you get a single beep until you get to the bottom, and it wraps back around to the top with a double beep, so I know I'm back at the top again. So that if I had a list of the menu choices, I would know, like, if I hear the double beep and let's say I want priority only, which is the second choice down. That's an example. I may not be exactly right. I would know to hear the double beep, then turn the knob 2 clicks, and I know I'm on the option that I want. But the manual, I don't trust in terms of they list all of the choices, but I don't trust that the choices are in order on your menu.
Right,
so
the print doesn't match the actual software. And of course, that can always change too. When they come out with another software rev, they add things to the menus. I mean, they do that right with the SDS 200. They added filters into there that didn't exist in the manual. Yeah. So I hear you. And it's a shame too, because if you think about it, you're spending a couple $100 on a scanner, and exactly what you say here with the menu text to speech in the menu, the $25 Baofeng radio does that. Every time you push a button, it tells you menu. And it goes through the steps, and it tells you what's on, or what you do when you change your channel. It'll say, channel 35, channel 36, channel 37. When you push the buttons, it'll tell you, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a $25 radio, And again, conventional only, but it's
interesting.
It is kind of a shame that that the couple of $100 hardware, scanner doesn't do that. And I think that'd be something they could probably just code into it. That they enable something like that, and again, that it may be able to ride right there on the firmware of the software because you've already got a speaker on it. So
Yeah.
it's not like, they need to do anything else additional to it or anything like that. But yeah, that'd be some. Have you written into Whistler or to Unit about that at all?
I haven't recently. A couple of years ago, I actually went through ScannerMaster, and I think I forget who they contracted, whether it was Uniden or Whistler. This would now have been 2 or 3 years ago, and they did not get very much of a response. I don't know what would happen now if I contacted them.
Gotcha.
I really don't know. So I have not done it.
Well, I'll do my best. I'll be sure that when I tag this podcast episode, I'll be sure to tag both Whistler and Uniden as part of the podcast, and maybe we'll give a little bit of attention to them as well to take a listen to this one, and maybe they'll have something for you to test out or not. I mean, I'm just wishful thinking here.
Pie in the sky. I get it. Fine.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I really do.
But so I'm going through the list here of the things we talked about. So obviously with the new scanners, you need something that doesn't have a lot of the menu driven, which is or a lot of screen time. Menu driven, I think, is as long as it's basic menus, you're comfortable with that. But when it comes to the new radios, that's completely menu driven, like the Home Patrol platform. That's just, I mean, even you can get lost in there. I mean, personally, I get lost in there. And then you talk about how you program, and I think that's very interesting too. I think that was a very creative way of going through what you've done, is by taking the information out of radio reference, pasting it into Notepad, and then being able to play with the data in Notepad. Then you can just paste it back in to FreeScan using the import. Now, have you tried using software like there's software they call Notepad++, and that one is kind of like Notepad on steroids. It does allow you to play with columns, and you can actually select an entire text column and then delete that column. So instead of bringing it through a spreadsheet program, you can keep it as a flat file in Notepad. Don't know how well that works as far as text-to-speech for you, but that is open source. So
this
there might be...
This is interesting to bring that up because I am on a a beta test list for the screen reader I use, and they have talked about using this program. I have not tried it yet because I didn't realize what its capability is. Now you're inspiring me to do that.
Yeah, I use it a lot because I find an issue with just flat Notepad. Sometimes it doesn't do the line carriage returns properly.
Right.
So you have to bring it to like WordPad, then copy out of WordPad, and then bring it back into Notepad. But Notepad++ does a really good job at that. And plus it has programming languages in there that I don't use programming languages, but if you were to, it would highlight the brackets and stuff like that to make it easier to figure out where you are in the format of the file. But I like it just because of the fact that it does allow you to play with a text file as if it was a database file or an Excel file, and allow you to just take out columns or rows. If you had to find and replace, it's very configurable with the find and replace. So if you wanted to find a tab and then replace it with commas, it could easily do that, although you just save it as a comma delimited file instead of a tab file. But that might be an easy way to bring in the radio reference information, and then change the last column where it's got, I think, the description, right? The fire attack, fire dispatch. You don't need that when you import it into, so you can just take that whole column and knock it out probably. So especially if it's open source, they may have the ability to have somebody work on. If it's not, I don't know if it's in there or not. That program does a whole lot of things, but to go back on what we were talking about here, just to be able to take the data out of radio reference, put it into something you can use, and then bring it into. So that's what you do, right? You use the copy from paste from clipboard. Is that what you do?
It's called Easy Grab.
That's right.
Grab.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it's really nice because you can even define, but it only gives you a certain number of columns that you can define.
Yes.
But if you can manipulate the data the way you want it, you could get an awful lot more in there than I'm getting now. So that's something that would definitely be worth looking into. Right. And the one thing I would say, though, is this method would only work with FreeScan. I do not think it would work with ProScan or Boodle. So I have not tried it because I know I'm not able to because I don't have trial versions anymore. But I want people to know that the only way you can do this is with FreeScan. Although I also can do it with the BC125 program that Uniden has. Basically, it saves your configuration in a text file that you can send to Notepad. In fact, I just did a major move of a block of about 15 frequencies from one bank to another. It took me like less than 5 minutes. And if you do it within the program, that doesn't work. So if you do it
Right.
in Notepad, it works good. So
I think the last time I used Butel's own software, it was for the 785 or the 780, and it was a mess back then. So I've
mhm,
kind of walked away from that.
right.
But it sounds like it is helpful for you in that way. So then I guess the other question is too, though, besides listening to it and like we were talking about before, knowing you had dispatch because it was a PD. How do you keep track though of what banks you've turned off and what banks you've turned on, or just what how do you know how the radio is configured that when you turn it on, it's where you need it to be? Just by, I mean, obviously there's a lot of listening, but I mean,
Well, I have to have a good memory, which thankfully I still have. If brain cells start to erode later on, I could be in trouble. And a lot of times it's true, I don't remember, and a lot of times I have to go back to the computer and use FreeScan to see where I'm at. What I try to do is to leave as few banks open as possible, just so that I can remember where I was and try to bring back in what I want. I just have to remember what numbers I've assigned to the different systems. So to answer your question, how do I do it? Very carefully.
Okay. And again, I'm sorry if these are some stupid questions too, because this is just it's a very, like I said, it's a very interesting topic to me. I've kind of always wondered this because again, a lot of the radios are, they're visual, so definitely something I was curious about for a long time.
Right.
And
know that none of your questions are stupid. You're doing just fine.
Great, thank you. And then the other question, I might ruin that now though, because I have a lot of customers that have this problem when I program the radios for them, and this ends up being a big tripping point to a lot of people. And I might say these two words, and it might make you cringe a little bit, but close call. Has that ever tripped you up as well?
I never use it.
Okay, well, okay, good, because I know a lot of people they accidentally turn it on, and then they can't figure out first of all how they've turned it on, and then how to turn it off.
That actually happened to me when I first got the scanner, and this was like now over a year ago, and I actually think FreeScan was able to help me turn it off. I've never, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I've never completely understood close call and how useful it really would be. So I have not used it at all. It sounds like a wonderful feature, but I just haven't found a reason for me for where I would use it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So because you had me think about that too when you talk about the priority mode, right? Because you have multiple priority modes. You have priority only, priority plus, whatever the other menus are. But it's the same story when it comes to close call. You have close call do not disturb, which basically would mean when you're scanning something, it doesn't go and look for a close call frequency. Actually, when you're monitoring a frequency that you have on, it's not going to leave that frequency to look for something that's close call. I think you have close call priority, and then there's another one in there that's skipping my mind right now. But basically what close call is for, and here's an example of exactly how I've used it in the past, which have worked out extremely well, is I went to go see a Marine Corps demonstration team at the local park. So what they do is they fly the helicopters in, they do a quick staging. Some of the troopers, they rappel down from the hovering helicopter. Mm-hmm. They do their formation, and then the helicopters land. But the helicopters are circling around where you can't hear them or see them. So they're staging somewhere a couple miles out, and then they come in when they got the clear. With the close call, the scanner locked in on them coming in. So I was able to then know, that the helicopters were coming in, and I could listen exactly to all the pilots talking between them. And that was probably the best situation I've ever used close call in, because the following year, even though I had the frequencies from the previous year, they changed frequencies, and they had them on the PA system so you can hear them. But me being me, I had to bring the scanner with me, and dropping it into close call mode, I was able to immediately find where they were. Another situation where that comes into play too is I live not too far off from a parkway, the Southern State Parkway.
Oh yeah.
So. And I'm about 8 blocks north of there. So every once in a while, we'll get a traffic helicopter that's just hovering overhead. Now, of course, I could put in the traffic, helicopters and listen to them. I could just scan aviation and try and find them. Or because I can physically see them, I just put the close call on there, and I just wait for them to key up and give their news report. And, of course, because there's line of sight and they're so close, the scanner locks right in on them, and I'm able to hear that transmission. I think I can double check it and make sure it's the right frequency I'm used to seeing them on. But
Yeah.
that's a real good example of
It,
where close call would work.
it's a good example, but if I'm understanding correctly, doesn't close call give you an alert that the frequency is there, and then you have to actually do something to listen in on it?
It depends. Yes.
Okay. So there comes another minor problem when you can't see the screen. But
right. Well, what it does tell you is it gives you a double or a triple beep when it has found a frequency, and then you have to press enter to tune into it. So normally what happens to me is I'll have the scanner away from me. By the time I run over to the radio, it's already gone past that screen. So that's why I can't tune in. So it is frustrating on that side. I wish it would just go there and stay there. I'm sure there's a way to do that, but for my needs, it's worked out well enough where I just got to make sure the radio is in my hand, and of course the enter key obviously hasn't changed in years where it's been. So, but it does alert you. It does give you a double or a triple beep, and you push E. The only trick was really that sometimes it auto stores, and that's where it could be painful. That'd be painful because now all of a sudden you have this extra frequency bank now that's turned on. It's not mapped to a key that you can never turn off. So, even with someone with sight, it's still very frustrating. So I can only imagine how much worse it is, when you can't physically see what you're doing with the scanner. So, and again, I do feel frustrated for you because just knowing how much more advanced these scanners are from where they were a decade ago and 2 decades ago and even 3, right? Even more than that when you started. Not to make you feel older and like that, but it's I didn't mean it in a bad way, but
no, I know. Trust me, I hear you.
And here I'm thinking too. I mean, to be honest with you, when you said you had started with the scanning and you completely went over the crystal stuff. To me, I thought that's exactly where you would have started because each frequency would have had a switch each frequency would have had a switch that you would have flipped up or down, and I just assumed just assuming something and being naive about it was I assumed that that's how you got started with it because you'd be able to run your fingers across the front of the scanner and say, okay, channel 1, 3, 5, and 7 are all turned on, and you knew what they were just by running your fingers across it. So to me, that's where it was like, well, how are you doing it now with the new scanners that are synthesized that it's and even worse than that now going, with all the trunk stuff and 99 or 100 banks, and how do you keep track? A 4-channel scanner, an 8-channel scanner, a 16-channel scanner, where it's all dip switches type of thing. But I mean, it sounds like you've got this figured out better than most of us. So.
I appreciate that. The one good thing too is if you when you're on either the unit and scanners, if you there's one thing about groups within a system, but if you have like 2 or 3 systems and you take them all off, you do get a beep that says nothing to scan. But if you just re-enable one of the systems, it's fine. So that part is not as frustrating. So I can always, in fact, on the 125 particularly, if I don't remember where I was, I just have to kind of experiment with buttons on systems I think I had going, and eventually I can get to the point where I have a clean slate and bring in what I want to do.
Right, and I'm thinking back too, like some of the other scanners that did trunking and conventional together, like again the 780, the 785, the 898, some of those earlier generations where you would have a scan list, right, or a scan bank. Then you'd have a trunk scan list, which was internal to that. And if you turned off the wrong buttons, you would actually lock out the entire trunk side of it. And then, or if you didn't put conventional frequencies in, and all you had was trunking in the bank, and you start locking out the conventional banks, now all of a sudden you have a trunk bank only on. It was almost impossible to get out of the trunk bank to turn the other conventional banks back on because you got locked into this trunk system scan list.
Wow.
So yeah, and before I actually figured out my way around it, which was basically put a dummy frequency in conventional into that bank. So like every bank in those scanners that I would program up that would have just a trunking in it, I would put 900 megahertz in there, or 800, just something in there that was an unused frequency that I could load the squelch on. And when I heard the squelch, I knew I was back in conventional mode, and I could turn that bank off or turn other banks on. But before I did that, though, I would have to rewrite the radio because it was almost impossible to get other banks back on. I guess you could turn the trunk off by pressing the trunk key, but I think you've definitely saved yourself a lot of struggle in the hobby by skipping over all those. I think sticking with the Pro 96 during that time frame, I think saved you, kept you in the hobby, and then coming over now to the 325 where it's dynamic memory as opposed to being a hard coded, 100 channels and 10 banks, those kinds of things. I think. I think, to be honest with you, I think you would have just frustrated yourself to the point of giving up on it way back
Yeah.
when.
Um,
So, go
for
ahead.
anyone who is happens to be low vision or blind that might be listening to this, you brought up a good point that I want to embellish on, because when you talk about figuring which banks are active or not, many is the time that I will program a dummy frequency like a weather frequency or an ATIS frequency or something that I know is going to be on all the time. And what's nice about the newer scanners is you have temporary lockout, so that if you don't remember you have a bank on, or if you turn a bank on or think you turned the wrong bank on, or turn a new bank on, you can lock out the frequency for that bank and know that when you turn it off and on again, if you made a mistake, you know that bank was still enabled because the dummy frequency is still on there. That's for anyone who might be wanting to do this, that's another nice trick to add a dummy frequency to different banks.
Yes, that's a great idea. It's something that you know what it is, and but then it could confuse you because if it's part of another scan list, then do you know if you're in the bank or so I could see where that could hurt you and help at the same time.
Well, you just have to find different things, like the
Yeah.
325 gets FM, so you could actually add
Oh, there you go.
M frequency to different systems and groups. You could do all kinds of things.
I guess, yeah. I mean, you got to be creative with it, so that's
You do.
excellent.
You
Yep.
absolutely.
So let's flip this a little bit. We did talk about some of the ways that you're getting by, right, with the scanners
Yeah.
and the software. So we talked about, though, how you wish that you had text to speech in the scanner so you knew what you were doing. You talked about some of the software that you wish it was more compatible with text to speech. So let's say you are able to build yourself your dream scanner and software suite to go along with it. For somebody in your shoes, what would be something you would love to have, something that would make it more accessible for you, and something that would just make life a whole lot easier to getting in the hobby, staying in the hobby, and enjoying the hobby on a whole nother level for you?
The wheels are turning. Can't you hear them?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is your platform right now. So if you have a wish list, or if there's something you would think about, I mean, I would really hope that this would be the point that a manufacturer will listen up and take note. So this is where I want you to go for it.
A lot of this is going to be a rehash of what
That's fine.
of what I've already talked about. But I think probably the first important thing is that since so many blind and low vision people are using computers, and since there is software available to program these scanners, the software should be able to announce where you are on the screen, so that you can know what you're entering, and be able to allow you to move around using the keyboard when you go, say, from system to system or group to group. The virtual scanner control is a wonderful feature to have as well. It's a little bit hokey, FreeScan, to use with my screen reader because I use Braille, so that makes it a little bit easier, because I can keep my Braille display in one place as I'm going through menus and see what's going on. But a lot of people don't use Braille, so we'd have to develop some kind of a way that you could position the screen reader on the part of the menu that you're working with if you're going that route. But I think it's doable. But I think basically to be able to hear where you are as you're working on a system or group, that is paramount with the software, so that you know what you're doing. As far as the scanner itself, obviously, with the menus as complicated as they are, you need to have some kind of spoken feedback. When I press that menu button, I want to know, like on the 325, it'll say program system. If I turn the knob once, it'll beep and say program location. If I turn the knob again, it'll say close call search, or whatever it is. And then when I enter, I need to be able to drill into the submenus and hear what's going on. There's pretty good confirmation about knowing when you have like systems turned on and off. You do get a beep every time you press a key. It's just because you can't see or hear what's on the screen. Maybe there could be a way that you could press a particular key sequence and it could tell you, like if you press hold, it could tell you what channel you're on. This way I would know, I could know where I am. In fact, it's interesting, FreeScan, when you do scanner control, somebody put an option in there to say speech synthesize group names. So like or frequent, IDs is what happens. So like if I'm scanning and I'm on fire dispatch, it will come back and say fire dispatch as the scanner tunes in, which is really kind of cool. I wish that kind of thing could be in the scanner itself.
That's a pretty neat idea. I was thinking more of the menus, but yeah, just even to take text to speech on the alpha tag or the description would be amazing.
Yep, just so you know where you are. In a manual or even on Radio Reference, Radio Reference it's a wonderful website. We all know that. And there are wiki pages that talk about the different scanners. There could be a possible place where we could take, like they have pages on each of the scanners, and maybe there could be a page that says, here are the menus, here's how you get to them. When you get to the menu, these are the options you have. And you could have tips on, like, when you turn the knob, you hear a beep. And so if you go down, one beep means program system. The next beep is program location, just so you know, like, how many times to go down to get where you need to go. Like on the 125, if I go into settings and I want to go to contrast, if I turn the knob and maybe it beeps 3 or 4 times, I forget what it is. If I had a list of menu items in front of me, I would know how many times to go down and, maybe adjust the contrast or whatever I'd want to do if I want to do it. So that would be another wish thing. Now I really can't think of a whole lot else at this point. Those would be the biggest things. Some of the manuals, and that's whether you said it or not, some of the manuals I know are a little bit more difficult to read. I know that there's a whole website with easier to read manuals, and that that does help a little bit, although the manuals are the pages are very big, and there were certain guidelines that should have been followed when they wrote the page, where it's not as easy to get around using a screen reader, and that's more technical than I want to get into. But like if you go to a link and press enter on it, which is what you have to do to a screen reader, there's just too much content for the screen reader to bring that part of the page up. And there are also ways that you can write the code to put what are called headings, which means a heading is basically different size of print. Like a heading 1 is large print, heading 2 is smaller. So you can, further divide your stuff. And if there were more headings in there, you could more quickly get to the part of the manual that you want. But Mark's done a pretty good job of trying to rewrite the manuals so that they're in a more logical order to be able to understand what's going on, particularly with the 325. So, but the manuals, if maybe more care could be taken to their list when they're talking about the menus, to make sure that the options they list are in the order that appear on the menu, that would be a very big help. And then if you're going to revise the manual for a new version of the scanner, you can just incorporate that into the manual itself.
Right. So now my wheels are turning here too. Now thinking about listening to what you're talking about, because I have plans to make online training courses for each scanner that's out on the market now.
Oh, wow.
And eventually going back. Yeah, it's a lot of work. Trust me.
Yes.
Just even getting started on it is overwhelming. And I think Mark did an amazing job doing the print manual, but I would like to make a course on it. So listening to what you are saying, and I want to make sure I can do this so that it's beneficial for you as well. So if I go through the course, I say I would just map out the keyboard. I'd say on the left side you have the filing buttons from top to bottom, and then on the right hand side of the keyboard you would have the key sequence and whatever else. But if I go through the menus, it would be, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I were to say the first menu option is programming, the second option down from there is the next one, the third one down is whatever. And then if we say we were going into the programming menu, I would say press the menu button once. Your first option is programming. You're going to push enter again. Now your third option down is what we're looking for, and that is that's the way that would be most beneficial for you.
Definitely on the right track with that.
Okay, then that is definitely the way I'm going to do it when I start recording my training videos. Is I'll definitely be very conscious about where things are as far as remembering to say it. Not because everything's going to be on video. It's very easy to say, just scroll down to here. But I will definitely make it a point to make sure that I walk through the number of turns of the dial and everything else to cycle through everything as well.
Yeah, you're certainly on the right track with that.
Okay, perfect. So, and then what I'll do too is, if you're interested, when I start the process of making the course up, I may send you a couple of videos to take a listen to see if it's helping you guide your way along the radio, and see if you have any feedback from me on that, if you wouldn't mind.
I would be more than happy to do that. Absolutely.
Okay, because I want to make sure that everybody can. I love the scanning hobby. I'm very happy to hear that you are enjoying it as well, and I hate to hear there's limitations. I mean it shouldn't be, but that's just the way. I mean the way things are, to put it bluntly with it. So anything I can do. I mean that's my point. The point here is for me to help, and if I can help you doing that, then that's what I want to make sure I'm able to do.
Well, your other podcasts have been very helpful, for sure. So it's you're certainly again, you're on the right track with that. I've been very pleased with what you've done. I know what I was going to say. It's kind of a little disclaimer.
Sure.
I am not a scanner expert, and I have mentioned a lot of limitations here that I've had. It is conceivable. I have tried to learn this all on my own. I've never had anyone cited who knows these scanners work with me. It is very possible that some of my limitations are because of things I've missed. I just want to say that just in case somebody comes back to you and says, well, did he know that you could do this? It's possible I didn't. So I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there.
No, and that's something excellent to bring up as well. So basically, you're self-taught. You don't really have anybody sitting over your shoulder and saying this is what the screen is showing you now, or you've kind of. Wow.
My sighted wife, God bless her, has helped with things. She will read the menus to me, but there's some of the stuff that neither one of us understands, so it's a little bit harder, to do anything. But particularly with the 125, she's helped me out a couple of times where I'll bring up the menu and she can read the menus to me so that I can, she's my text to speech, and it works. It's worked out very well. In fact, she's helped me with the 325 a couple of times too. So, but other than that, I have not had anyone who really knows how to use a scanner sit down with me and work through it.
Excellent. Okay. So that's even, I'm speechless about that. I mean, it's great that you were able to learn, especially with the radios that are out there today. So, I think if you had gone into it and you jumped in, feet first now, I think it probably would have been overwhelming. But because you had such a long time background in it, and the way that you got in with just a dial radio that you can just tune around, that had boundaries on it, right? Because you can only go so far left and so far right before you ran out of real estate on the.
Exactly.
I
broke more than one dial cord. Trust me.
It reminds me of when I was first a kid. My dad gave me a shortwave radio. I don't remember what the make and model of it was, but I got the dumb idea one day to take the dial cord off. I think because it had slack in it or something like that, and I quickly realized that you can't do that. So, I thought I could restring this.
Yeah.
No, it was forever pointless.
Forever damaged.
So, yes. Well, I mean, with tune, you just didn't know where it was.
Exactly.
So, and I never really played around with it much after that, and I think it just sat in my closet until eventually it hit the garbage can. So,
All right.
I never got in trouble for it. So if my dad's listening now, he's gonna know what happened to that scanner. But
He's probably
oh,
forgotten too.
that short, yeah, it was a shortwave radio that he gave to me. So, but multi-band. But very good. Is there anything else you want to bring up though before we wrap it up for the day?
I think for right now, no. This has been as far as I'm concerned, I've enjoyed talking with you. I hope I've given you guys some useful information, and really, it's been fun.
So, Pete, I want to thank you very much for taking the time on this Saturday afternoon to speak with us and to do this recording. And it definitely brought, attention to what it is you go through on a day-to-day. And, not only you, but I know there's other people out there that, you said, are visually impaired, that either have limited sight or no sight at all, and are able to enjoy the hobby of scanning. I know there's a couple out there, too, that also enjoy amateur radio, that, they do that as well. And it's just great to hear that even with that limitation. Again, hopefully I don't sound non-PC to say it. I'm not the kind of person that likes to be PC. I just kind of say it the way it is, and hopefully there's no offense behind that. But to me, it's great that you are able to enjoy this hobby, and I'm happy that you're able to. And my hope is that the right people listen to this podcast and are able to help you out, and are able to make hardware and make the software more compatible, so that you're able to take your hobby now to the next level and to enjoy it, on a more personal level, I guess is the way to say it here. So with that, thank you, Pete, for taking the time and sharing your story with everybody.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much. Pete, I want to thank you again. This was a great interview, and I am thrilled that you spent the time to discuss this with all of us. And if anybody out there would like to comment on this, or if you have any suggestions for Pete, you'd like to get in touch with them, really the best way to do so at this time is just leave a comment at scannerschool.com/session86. Also, that's our show notes page, so we'll have some links in there as well. But Peter had asked if he wanted to reach out and contact him. We just leave it as a comment in that show notes right there. Also, I want to remind everybody that you can help support Scanner School by going to scannerschool.com/support. From there, you can become a monthly Patreon supporter. You can support us with a one-time PayPal fee. If you want to purchase new hardware, you can do so by going to ScannerMaster. We have a link to ScannerMaster that helps support Scanner School, as well as software from Butel. And if you're an Amazon shopper, again, like I am, a huge Amazon shopper. I got like 3 deliveries just this weekend alone, plus my groceries. Again, you go to scannerschool.com/support, and you can click any of the links in there. And once that takes you out, it's got our little tags on it, and that helps support Scanner School. So looping back to Patreon, again, this is our month-to-month PBS type of model, where basically you're pledging for help to help us out. And I want to thank all those who are helping us. Stephen Sheffield, Scott Vorder, Signals Everywhere, Craig Harper, Ken Newberry, Kenneth Fowler, William Arcan, Dan, Glenn Bryden, Anthony Saggio, Raymond Hill, James Felling, MT Bono, and Mark Beebe. So, again, we have some bonuses when it comes to being a Patreon supporter. One of them being early access to the podcast. And we're going to be bringing back, starting September, because that's when most of the schools in my area at least start back to school. I think it's a good time for me to start back our monthly online Q&A sessions as well. So instead of there just being an Ask Scanner School, I'd also like to bring back our old Scanner School Facebook once a month Q&A sessions where you can ask me questions live. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this for a 30-minute session, open in public, and then for my Patreon supporters at a set tier, and we're going to announce that tier later on, you'll have your own dedicated 30-minute discussion with me as well, as a little bonus for the thanks for being Patreon supporters. We're also working on some more bonuses for those who are in Patreon right now. So we might be doing some restructuring on Patreon, but I got a couple more weeks, and I'll come with that announcement most likely the first week of September. So until then, I want to remind you that if you have any questions for Scanner School, you please submit them scannerschool.com/ask. That's a great way to get your questions asked. And again, if you want a free consulting call, just leave me a voicemail using SpeakPipe or a voicemail number. So that's the best way for you to win that and ask us a question as well. We'll catch you again next week. I have another awesome interview lined up. We're going a little bit heavy right now on interviews. And if you have something you want to bring up on the podcast, something you're an expert in, something that you know very well and you want to share and discuss with the podcast, you can go to our website, scannerschool.com. At the very top, there'll be the podcast. Click on that, and there'll be a Be a Podcast Guest where you can fill out the date and time that works best for you. Leave me what your subject is that you want to talk about, and it automatically books it in my calendar, and then we can sync up over Skype and do the interview. No Skype? No problem. We do it over the phone. So with that, I know it's a long session. I'm out of here. Have a good one. We'll catch you all next week. My name is Phil Lichtenberger. This podcast is here to help you learn more about the scanner radio hobby, and I think we did that today. 73, everyone.